Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Podcraft. This is the show all about running a successful podcast. I'm Colin Gray from ala2.com and the podcast host, joined by Matthew. As always, how are you getting on, Matthew?
Splendid, Colin. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad today, actually. We're both saying it's actually not too bad weather here in Scotland today, so whenever we walk in the blue skies, eh?
Yeah, sweating coming home. The weather's actually been really nice today, and I did not expect that. So I'd wrapped up warm and paid the price in sweat.
Overdressed.
Yeah.
I was excited to see the topic you suggested this morning. Actually, I think this is quite interesting. We've got some really good feedback on our last few episodes around the kind of more opinionated stuff, isn't it? Like posing a few questions and just giving our thoughts. So hopefully people will enjoy this one as well. But you came up with this one, Matthew. Do you want to introduce what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, we're going to, like we've done fairly recently, just take a bunch of stuff in podcasting, whether that's best practices or tools or commonly held beliefs, and we're just going to go through them and decide whether we think they're underrated or overrated. So some of this carries over from the episode where we did, like, is this still relevant in 2026?
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of stuff we didn't get to, and I heard from a few listeners saying they were keen to keep going with that. So this is along the same theme, just slightly reframed. So ready to get into it, Colin?
Yeah, perfect. I'll just jump in before we do. We've had a very kind sponsor this time around. So today's episode is sponsored by Beamly. So Beamly is a tool which lets you monetize your content, create a membership around your podcast, create premium podcast feeds for members only. I'll talk a bit more about it later on in the episode, but thanks very much to Beamly for sponsoring this episode. All right, Matthew, what you got for the first one?
All right, so underrated or overrated good microphone technique. What do you think, Colin?
I mean, I think this is the most underrated thing in podcasting for a lot of people, isn't it? Because so many people jump straight to the tools, they jump straight to the audio processing, particularly these days when AI processing is so good, to get rid of pops, to get rid of breaths, to get rid of, well, I don't know, just bad technique. If you're too far away and it's a bit too airy, it's too reverby. So if you've got good mic technique, there's so much that actually doesn't need taken care of, so much processing you don't need to do. I'm going to guess that might be your feeling as well, Matthew. Is that right?
Yeah, I think this is underrated, and I think this is increasingly so in a world where we're not seeing loads and loads of podcasters leading with video first, but we're seeing some new podcasters that are coming in and they're maybe heavily inspired by some big video shows. So they're paying a lot of attention to their visuals. They've got really nice looking studio setups. But it's just one of the trade-offs is they've not paid attention to their microphone positioning or technique or even the room. And I think this all kind of is under one kind of audio quality umbrella. So I think paying attention to your mic technique, vastly underrated. And it's something we should be very aware of as podcasters.
How do you think about it? Like, how do you teach good mic technique? Where should the mic be? What distance? All that kind of stuff. There's all these hand signals that people have used in the past. What do you use?
Yeah, so starting point always like just outstretched palm, so the very tip of your pinky to the very tip of your thumb. I think that's a good starting distance between the end of the mic and your mouth. But again, people are different. Like, we talk at different volume levels. Some people are very animated when they speak. Some people are quite static. So I think you have to adjust based on your own delivery. And I kind of like as well, rather than talking right down the barrel of the gun, I like to get kind of just off-centre because I find that protects the mic a lot against plosives. I'm not a big fan of pop filters. I don't mind putting a foam pop filter on like a windjammer on the mic, but I don't like the old school, the circular pop filter.
And it's stuck to your arm and it's like sticking right out with a sock wrapped over it. Yeah, I hate those things. They just always get in the way and fall off, don't they?
Yep, totally. So, that's kind of how I do it. Is that kind of in line with your advice, or do you think differently?
Yeah, totally the same. I think the way I've described it is, that, what was it, the old surfer site? Maybe this is a totally like 70s, 80s reference or something, but you stick your thumb and your pinky out full length and then you bring your other fingers down and you wave it around. It's like the surfing sign.
Cool boomer.
Yeah, exactly. Cool boomer. That's it. I'm not a boomer. I'm a Just
But men of our age get called boomers now by younger
yeah,
scamps. So
by particularly young people. Yeah, I'm right on the
yeah.
ex-millennial cusp. Thank you very much, Matthew. So, but yeah, that's how I think about it. But yeah, absolutely right. If you stretch your fingers out as wide as they'll go, yeah, pinky to thumb. That's how I think about it too. Right now, do you know what mic technique? That's almost exactly how far I am from my mic. I've just like tested it for myself, and that's about right. It
Yeah,
measures
you're
like
right.
it's like 8, 9 inches, something like that, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah. Same
And,
here.
and
Same here.
and I do the same. I put it off center too. I've always found that, like, actually, partly because often when I'm recording a podcast, I'll have maybe some info in front of me, maybe a bit of a script, bullet point script, an outline, something like that. And I've got my mic on the boom arm, so I just naturally have it a bit off center anyway. But yeah, just worth thinking about as well because it helps combat those plosives. So yeah, like it. Definitely an underrated one, I think.
Definitely. So what we got next on the list then?
What about underrated or overrated, Matthew? Your putting effort into your podcast description. So, like, does anyone actually ever read your podcast description? Any evidence that it works for SEO? What do you think?
I'm going to go underrated on podcast description for a couple of different reasons. Like this is older data now, but we ran surveys in the past, listener focused surveys, and a lot of the top results for how people were kind of vetting new podcasts was the podcast description. Again, this is going back maybe 5 or 6 years now, but it's not just that. We've talked about this before, how like your podcast description is just often something, I'm sure we've all made a podcast before, and the very last thing you do just before uploading an episode, you realise you've not filled out your podcast description. So you just basically, you bang something in there quickly and 5 years pass and it's just that same text. And I think just because like writing a podcast description is such a low hanging fruit now, it's so easy to do, especially if you've already launched and you kind of know where your podcast's doing, where it's going and what it does. I think you could write a really good description, and if hypothetically, AI search and everything, if that's looking at that description, which there's a good chance it will be, why wouldn't you pay attention to it? It's not hard to do. It's not going to take a long time. So that's why I think it's underrated. What's your own thoughts?
That's a nice way of thinking about it, actually. I like that. I think you're right. I think it's underrated too, in that I think that a lot of people, as you say, they put a bit of thought at the start, never look at it again. And actually their topic changes completely over time. You refine what exactly your audience are looking for, what that real pain point is, like what's the first thing that's going to resonate with them? What can you write in that description that makes them look at it and go, this show is exactly what I need right now. And I think maybe the whole description is a bit potentially overrated, but I think the first couple of lines, that's like my approach to it is when I'm finding a new podcast, it's the artwork and the title are the first kind of element, the bits that drag me in. But I'll always look at the first couple of lines of the description just to get a quick confirmation that this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I think if anything, even just keep updating your first couple of lines as you discover more language that resonates with your listener, more questions, more pains, more problems, more whatever it is that that really drags people in. I think those first couple of lines make a big difference. And even though, there's not like compelling evidence that it's a huge SEO factor in the actual search engines for the podcasting apps themselves, you're absolutely right. Like thinking about it as AI search from now on. They'll be covering that content. They'll be looking at that. So yeah, if you're looking for a recommendation for a podcast in ChatGPT or whatever now, then you want to make that description be really effective for actually teaching those. I think that's a good tip there. Let me jump into one last. What about like podcast descriptions? I'm quickly scanning down. What about episode descriptions, show notes?
Potentially again. I was going to say underrated. I think maybe adequately rated on this one. Like, I don't necessarily know if they're over or under. Have you got a different angle there?
I think I think people do put attention into them. I don't know if people put enough. We've often talked about the fact that one of the biggest underrated methods of search, of being found, of discovery, of like audience growth is SEO, is actually being found in text. So like having good show notes, having good show descriptions actually works as great discovery because people, can find them just in Google search and then find out you've got a podcast attached to it. And I think that's going to be even more relevant in the days of AI as well, when they're reading through all of your show notes and finding great great answers to questions that you've covered in there. So yeah, I think it is. I think one of my questions around that though is whether it's underrated or overrated, getting AI to actually write these for you. I think so many people are moving to actually episode descriptions, show notes, just purely written by AI. Um, and actually, I'm finding with a bit of tweaking, with working with Claude, ChatGPT, and actually creating like a wee project in there, giving it some good context, giving it a good idea of what your show's about, what kind of language you use, what format you want those show notes to actually cover. As in, do you mention resources often? Do you mention people often? Do you want like 4 big takeaways, things like that? I think actually you can get really good, effective show notes that only need a light edit from that, because it's based on the content that you're creating yourselves anyway. It's not like it's writing from scratch. It's taking your core content and turning it into written content. I think you can get really good episode show notes from that. And I think it's probably underrated, the power that those can have for actually pretty little effort these days.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AI like ChatGPT or whatever can take your transcript and obviously write show notes, but I wouldn't just let it come up with what it believes show notes should look like. Like I would definitely prompt it a bit more. Like if I've used it in the past to create show notes, I've always said things like, I want you to open with a question for the listener. Pose a question for the listener to get us. And don't keep saying, in this episode, this conversation then goes on, all that padding and filler and throat clearing. You've got to kind of coach it out of that. Otherwise, it's very bland and generic. So, like anything else on AI, it's you get out what you put in, I suppose.
Yeah. I've got, my prompt for that, I've got a full-on project in Claude for that with a full project prompt that really, it details exactly how I want the show notes to look and what the language should be like, and examples of previous ones written by me as well. And it takes that, and I think that's the kind of sculpting I need.
That's exactly what, I went through and looked at a couple of show notes I'd wrote completely myself and was happy with and said, like, this is the style, like, don't deviate from this. So, yeah, it's good parameters to have. What about high bit rates, like in your MP3 when you're mixing it down? Like a high bit rate has always been regarded as something positive, or even if we think about like lossless audio, like people that are really into like it's got to be a WAV file, not an MP3. Like, do you think this level of care in podcasting is underrated or overrated?
I think utterly overrated. So going the other way this time, we did some testing around this, didn't we, Matthew? Because we make Alitu, obviously. So Alitu is our podcast maker app. You record in there, you edit in there, and we publish in there too. So we had to make a bet on what bitrate would be a good default. In the olden days, it was always like 128 kilobits per second people would talk about as a kind of high level. And I think I often would say like 96 actually is totally fine. And it became slightly less relevant, didn't it? Because the whole point is the lower the bit rate, the better the file size. But as like networks got a bit, like as mobile signals got better, kind of you don't care whether it's a 80 megabyte file versus an 120 megabyte file, but it still does matter for some people, like people that have data limits and stuff, don't they? So it does still matter, I think. And actually in our testing, so with Alitu, we did a lot of recording, editing, publishing, all that kind of stuff, tested what it was. And like barely anyone could hear any kind of difference between even 64 kilobits per second versus 96 or 128. And then you go up to like 128 versus 192 or 356. Is that the kind of next one up? Like nobody could tell the difference. Sorry, I shouldn't say nobody. There'll be some proper audiophiles out there that listen on the best headphones that actually could tell the difference. But like the average person just couldn't tell the difference at all. So yeah, I think you can go down to 96 certainly. And even like the 64, I think if you're really wanting to push it to smaller file sizes. What do you think though, Matthew? It kind of varies a little bit on your experience though with your audio drama and stuff too. So maybe it's context dependent. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so. Like I would agree. This is overrated in the main for spoken word content. And the caveat, you're right. Like audio drama, I really wouldn't want to go any lower than 128 kbps for an audio drama that I was making, because there's so many different sound effects and music and that. So I obviously want to present that as best I can, or as reasonably best I can for serving up to people. But yeah, I remember Robert Libson years ago, he used to talk about the fact that Mark Maron, I'm sure it was, very famous podcaster, he was uploading 64 kbps
Was he?
files, and
Yeah.
he was doing fine. And honestly, like when you listened, you wouldn't know. And we go on about this a lot, like how are people consuming podcasts? And this isn't a ticket to go out there and release poor sounding audio, but a lot of people are listening, through earbuds or on the bus or, walking down busy streets and that. So
Yeah.
they're not going to know if it's like 128 or 192 or that.
Yeah.
Interesting point on the file size and data and that. And, in the main, that's not so much of an issue. But I do remember when Mazinga was doing some Africa focused articles for us, she was saying
Mhm.
a lot of African countries, data is still very prohibitive, very expensive.
Really?
So,
Mm.
some of your global audience, you might think, what's the difference, a bit rate here or there, but you might be freezing some of your audience out potentially somewhere in the world. So it's worth keeping your file sizes down still for sure. So I do this
Yeah,
one.
cool.
I do as a 96,
Mhm.
96 kbps for Podcraft. I do that monofile and it sounds fine to me.
Yeah, I think that's a good standard. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay. What about next one? Underrated or overrated, Matthew? Short video clips for social.
Haha. Overrated. Definitely. Yeah. What do you think?
I think mostly overrated. I think the conflict I have here is that we post social clips for Podcraft every now and again. We do it for our YouTube videos as well. We post these short clips, and actually sometimes they get really good view rates. They get like 1,500, 2,000 people view it in the first couple hours, and that's a lot of people seeing it. Like that's more people than listen to this podcast. So you can get a good bit of visibility through them. And, there's plenty of examples of people going even a lot more viral than that as well with really well planned clips. But on the other hand, actually converting people to listen to the show from there, that's the tricky part. Like they're overrated in that even though you get those views, what do those views mean? Like what do they turn into? Do they turn into subscriptions? We've seen very little evidence of that. And I've been playing with a few things to try and encourage that more, like making more effort to put on like end screens and stuff like that. Not the traditional YouTube end screens, but like a little video clip that says go and subscribe to Podcraft on the end of them, things like that. So it makes it more obvious where to go and encourage them to take the action. But still, we've not really seen that much conversion. So I think even though you can get a bit of visibility there and it can make you feel good, you get that endorphin hit from seeing those numbers, I think they're pretty overrated in terms of actually growing a show. I think maybe it's more apt for growing a YouTube channel. So if you're a fully like YouTube visual video podcast, that actually YouTube is your primary delivery method, perhaps more for you. But for audio podcasts, I think they're overrated. Yeah. Is that kind of where you see it?
Yeah, I think for me, if the podcaster is able to just quickly do these shorts, it's a tiny footprint on their time. They're able to just get on there and upload them and let them do what they might potentially do in terms of reach. Then that's fine. There's no harm in it. The danger is when people get too into this algorithm game and that. I think that's where the dragons lie. When people start obsessing over, did the algorithm like that? And how do I need to adjust this to make the algorithms? And this isn't just YouTube, this is all the social
Yeah,
media platforms
everywhere.
as well. I think that it's a complete attention sook. It's taking your focus away from what really matters. And I think that's why I say this short video
Yeah.
culture is overrated.
Yeah. I think part of it is that you're absolutely right. Like if it could just take a few minutes, then fine. And that's the promise of the AI editors out there. Like you can just upload your clips to, various tools. Sorry, your full episodes to various tools, and they clip out good quality clips for you. But they just don't work that way. Like I've used them all, and the clips are never great on their own. Like they always need a little bit of tweaking, a bit of editing. They never have a decent hook at the start. They're just not that effective. And so you end up spending a fair bit more time on either editing them and posting those clips or creating separate ones. Like the best way I've found to do it is actually just right after your episode, just jump on the mic, put on your webcam, and actually just record a dedicated 60-second clip saying something like, what would it be? Like, at what bit rate should you use for your podcast? Like you start it with that question right away, and then go into it like a 60-second summary of what we just talked about, and then say at the end of it. And if you want to hear more about this, go to Podcraft. We talked about it this week. Go over to podcraft.net, and it's actually like a dedicated clip. And I can record that and publish that in 10 minutes. and it's actually less time than it takes to adjust one of these auto-created clips. So it's not like time free. It's like half an hour, 40 minutes, 50 minutes to do a few of them for the week. So yeah, I think it's underrated how easy it is for sure. Overrated how easy it is, sorry.
I think the ones you're doing in that style for Podcraft are really good, and that's exactly the way I would advise doing them. I've not got a massive sample size to draw from, but I've literally never seen a good AI generated short. Never seen one. Have you?
Rarely. Well, AI, it's hard to tell, isn't it? I've seen decent shorts from podcasts, but they're heavily cut. And I have a very, very strong feeling that the ones I've seen that I think were good were completely human made. You know,
Mhm.
you take like a 2 or 3 minute segment with some good hooks, a good question, blah, 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 and then you cut it down into 30, 40, 50 seconds. I think that's the only way that those kind of ones work.
Mhm.
Yeah. Right, before we jump into the next one, Matthew, can we talk about Beamly? So,
Yes.
Beamly, kind sponsor of this episode. Have you heard of them before?
I have, yeah. I believe they are a membership platform where you could run like private podcasts and that. And if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
I'm going to have egg on my face here.
No, that's it exactly. Yeah, they used to be podcast web. Is it podcast websites? There were a few similarly named things, so I think it's a great idea that they've renamed their company there. But it's partly because they refocused as well. Actually, they're not just websites anymore, and it's all about paid content, really. So they say, it's your paid podcast content all in one place. You can create those premium podcast feeds that you want to, so people can pay to subscribe to your premium podcast feed. But you can also run a membership via that as well. So you've got a premium podcast feed and memberships that you can actually create and run that from your own site as well. So have you seen many people doing this, Matthew? You had much experience with folk running those private feeds or memberships?
It's one of the things that off the top of my head, I can't pull anyone out as an
Yeah, yeah,
example.
yeah,
But I'm sure, given time, I could think of a few
yeah. I've
folks that
seen,
have been.
yeah. I've seen a lot around actually, and there's so one guy I'll give a shout out to Jay Klaus. I listen to a fair bit of his content. I'm a member of his membership, and he does this exact thing. So he has a membership, a really nice, effective, like sort of small, intimate membership. It's really good actually. But he runs a private RSS feed in there, and so that kind of thing you could run. On Beamly, you actually have like a group of people that follow you, that enjoy your content. You create the actual membership space in there. You can create courses inside Beamly. You can, publish those videos if you want to, video podcasts. It supports audio and video podcasts in Beamly as well, and have a premium RSS feed, which is a private RSS feed essentially that people subscribe to, and you can put stuff on there. And some of my favorite types of this, Matthew, are like, you sometimes see people doing, whether it's ad-free episodes. That's maybe the easiest one. That's a premium feed. You can do ad-free episodes, but equally you can do bonus content, whether it is, you've done an interview with somebody and then you cut off the last 10 minutes and you put like some special questions in there that you keep for the private feed. Or have you seen people doing like the more like a voice note on a walk, Matthew, where they're just kind of keeping people updated? It's almost like a voice diary type thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a format we've talked about quite a lot recently, isn't it? So
Yeah, I love that as private content because it's kind of a behind the scenes. Like, it's actually quite easy to make as well. So you do that behind the scenes content. People are willing to pay for that because they want to get to know you better. It's the people that are big fans of your show. So, yeah. So Beamly can do all that: membership, premium content, RSS feeds that are private for members, and it supports audio and video podcasts as well. So you can go over to Beamly. That's beamly.com to try it out, and check them out. Tell them we sent you.
is that EAMLY?
That is exactly it. beamly.com. All right, Matthew, shall we get into the next one? What have we got next?
Yeah, so we're 2 for 2, aren't we? 2 underrated, 2 overrated. The next one up is researching guests and planning out your interviews beforehand. Is that underrated or overrated, Colin?
I think that you always have to have a plan, but that it doesn't need to be too strenuous. So I think I think one of the best ways, I think the thing that's mainly or underrated about this is actually planning your intro. So I think planning your intro is one of the most important parts of interviews, because if you can plan a great intro that you actually read on the show itself. So you actually read it in front of the person. And I know this is counterintuitive to some people. A lot of people will record an interview and then record the intro afterwards. But I think there's big power in reading that intro on the interview, because if you give your guest a really good intro, you tell people like where they're from, like what their background is, you tell them about their products, you tell them about what they're pitching just now. You say they've just released a book on blah blah blah. Then suddenly there's a lot of power in that to just help that guest relax. They know that most of their work is done. Their credibility is established. You've given a bit of that history. You've told a bit of their basic story, and you've basically done the pitch. Why are they there? They've got a book, they've got a product, whatever it is. And they relax, and it pulls them out of that party line. It pulls them out of just the thing that they always talk about in the first 5 minutes of a show to make sure they get value out of it. Because the worst thing you want is just to get the same old backstory, the same old, oh, so tell me a bit about yourself. How did you get to where you are just now? Which is just about rubbish. Like, people just want you to get to the actual meat of it. What is this person's unique viewpoint? What is this person really uniquely qualified to teach? What can I learn from them? So I think the big underrated part is that prep, that intro that you can read on the actual interview itself, and then that helps you get straight into the actual meat of the content.
I know you always love it, Colin, when podcasters say to you, like, well, I mean, Joe Rogan, he seems like he's just like figuring it out as he goes. Like, what do you say? What do you say to someone who's about to take that approach?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the big podcasters like the Rogans and all the rest, it sounds like they're just kind of ad-libbing it, but they obviously, like, you can tell if you think about it, like how much prep there has gone into this. Like, they'll bring up certain questions or different topics, or there's a sudden topic switch that almost sounds natural, but you're like, no way, they knew exactly what they were doing there. So yeah, all of those big podcasters have done the prep. I think the only person that we've heard say that they don't is Mark. You mentioned Mark Maron, didn't you? Mark Maron's sometimes claimed to be a complete ad-libber. But then again, Matthew, like, how much practice and experience did Mark Maron have on stage, ad-libbing, making good stuff up and being entertaining on the spot compared to most podcasters?
Yeah, exactly. Mark Maron's Mark Maron, isn't he? So,
well, he's not even just Mark Maron. He's like a pro comedian that had been on stage, like spent literally hundreds or thousands of hours on stage. Like, that was his craft. That was his thing, that he could do that stuff on the spot. That's not us.
Another wee tip for the listener, this is something I've tried quite recently. So say you've got a guest who has kind of done the rounds a wee bit and has done the standard intro story quite a lot. What you could do is take 3 or 4 interviews, or even just like one good interview that they've had somewhere, grab the transcript from that, pop it into ChatGPT or Claude, and just ask it, like, what wasn't talked about here? Like, what angles weren't covered? Or what follow-up questions did the interviewer not pick up on here that might be interesting to pick up that thread and build on that? So I think you could find these gaps. You don't just want to recreate conversations that have already happened elsewhere. So if like I say, if you've got a guest on that's doing the rounds, maybe they've got a book, you don't just want to, let's repeat this conversation. Let's try something a little bit different. So
yeah. There's so often. I'm sure if you're out there listening, you'll have seen that experience where suddenly the same name pops up over 4 or 5 of your favorite shows in a few weeks, and you just end up skipping them after you've listened to 1 or 2, unless that person claims to have a unique take on it. Like, you don't lead with the name of the person. You lead with the problem, the solution, the whatever it is that they're actually helping you with, and that makes the difference, I think. Yeah.
So are we going for?
Yeah.
Are we going for underrated for this one then? Researching guests, planning interviews?
I think aspects of it, definitely underrated. Yeah, for sure. That leads into our next one, actually, Matthew. Should we go through a couple of, we're half an hour in now. Like, should we go through a couple of quick fire ones? We'll try and do a few in 1 or 2 minutes, because we've got a listener question would be good to get to as well, don't we?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Let's do some quick fire.
All right. So here's quick fire. Leads into celebrity guests. Matthew, are celebrity guests under or overrated?
So widely overrated, yeah. I think the only caveat here is that if they're a quote-unquote celebrity in your niche and they're actually coming to you, to speak about the topic rather than just themselves, then I think that's a different take on it. But what do you think?
I think same. Yeah, absolutely. I think occasionally you'll get somebody listening to a show. I occasionally listen to a show just because it's a celebrity I do like or follow or whatever. But actually, far more often, I would listen if they had a good point of view. It's like the topic. Like I want the title to grab me as opposed to just the name of the person. So yeah, I think it's all about finding that unique viewpoint no matter who the person is. So celebrity or completely non-celebrity, you just need to find their unique viewpoint and lead with that instead.
All right. Underrated or overrated podcast sponsorship as means of monetization?
Overrated. I think so many people think that this is the way to monetize a podcast, but there's so many better ways for many podcasters, like, selling, like creating your own product or affiliate marketing or selling services or creating your own community or premium podcast content, like we just talked about earlier. So yeah, I think there's so many better ways to do it that you can earn more money out of it as well. For all the average people like us that, have just hundreds or thousands of podcast listeners as opposed to tens of thousands or more.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. And we've said in the past, small audience podcasts, they can hypothetically do really well with sponsors, and a few have, but it's just not it's not even in the top 10 best ways to monetize, is it? So,
no. What about intro music, Matthew? Under or over?
It's a funny one, isn't it? I could honestly, I could go either way on this, which maybe means it's just. I don't want to say it depends.
It's well rated.
Because it's a cop out if I say it depends, but it kind of does. Like I would say, 25 seconds of music is overrated. But if you don't have it at all, that's the thing. Like when I started my podcast 5 years ago, my most recent podcast, I didn't put any music on, and a few listeners actually said, "Go and put some music on at the start." So it's literally like 3 seconds. You'd think that was strange, but I guess there's just a little bit of identity or branding. Maybe they've got a playlist on and they don't immediately know what show it is. I don't know. So I'm struggling to come out with an answer here. What about you?
I think it's over, mostly over. I think it's totally fine. I do like a bit of intro music. I'll happily put it in, happily work with people to help them, like recommend. Yeah, fine, put intro music in. Keep it short. Make sure it's like less than a few seconds on its own, and then it maybe goes behind the voice for the first 10, 20, 30 seconds of the intro. So I think long intro music is well overrated, but a nice little bit of intro music can work fine for a few seconds. The decider for me, I think, is actually, obviously some people do. I was going to say, if there's no intro music on a podcast, do you miss it? And I don't. Like, there's a few shows I listen to that don't have intro music, and it's not like I'm thinking, oh, why do they not have music? But obviously you've got evidence that some people do think that way.
Yeah, and I mean that's very anecdotal and a very small sample size. But you're right. If I had to get off the fence, I'd maybe go on the side of overrated. Especially like going back to when we were doing coaching and that. I do remember some clients they really procrastinated on choosing music, and it was just like, look, forget about the music, just get it launched. If you want to add music, let's get a couple of episodes out, and we could always add it in later. So let's go over then.
Cool. Okay,
what about a podcast editor? Overrated, underrated?
Podcast editor. I mean, it depends on the editor, obviously, a little bit. But a good podcast editor is generally a very maybe underrated thing, like what they can do for you. It's the fact that a good podcast editor can give you great feedback on so many things, like not just your audio quality, your mic technique, like we talked about earlier, the structure of your show, but equally like your content. Like actually give you a good podcast editor should be able to give you some feedback around, what you're covering and maybe the length of it, and be able to give you good feedback around how to improve it and make it more engaging as well. So there's all sorts of things that I think a good podcast editor can do that that is worth the money. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go Wonder as well for all the reasons you've mentioned, yeah. And it's, more and more podcasts out there. It's just an extra little way to stand out if you've just got that little bit of attention to detail in the production, which an editor could help you with. So
I think that's the part that's only going to be more and more valued as well, actually, because talking about like podcast software like Alitu, for example, can do all of the podcast cleanup. So you don't need to worry so much about EQ and leveling and all that kind of stuff. It can even remove ums and ahs and things like that. So like software like Alitu and others can do so many things like that podcast editors used to spend painstaking time on. So it's more the human side of it, isn't it? It's more the fact that an editor can actually help you restructure your content and cut out the fluff and actually give you proper good human feedback on that content itself. So yeah, I think that's the part that's underrated.
do you want to leave it there and get to the listener question, or is there any more on the list you're desperate to?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's get to the listener question. We could come back to some. We've got another 7 or 8 here, don't we? So we maybe come back to that in a future episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to spend a bit of time on this listener question. So yeah, go for it. Why don't you set us up?
Yeah, so we had a question in from Borgil, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apologies if not. But they're saying, hi Alitu team, I've published 6 episodes, the 7th is ready, but haven't launched publicly yet. So no announcements, no consistent promotion. They're saying they're a purpose-driven creator feeling stuck between making and sharing, and asking for recommended strategies for a sort of relaunch when the episodes are already out there. So whilst at the starting point here, what are the 3 to 5 highest impact steps to take in the first 2 weeks? So this is a podcast that has published episodes in the feed, and I guess we're just now looking at ways where we could start to make the target listeners aware of it, aren't we?
Yeah, totally. I think the first thing to say there is he says it's a relaunch, as in it seems like he feels guilty that he's not been promoting it up till now, doesn't it? But he's only on 6 episodes at the moment. I think that's a really common and actually quite a good way to go about it, like not to spend. I mean, you can go both ways. There's an argument for both ways, but I think there's definitely an argument for putting out 5, 6, 7 episodes before you put a whole lot of effort into marketing, because so much can change in that first month, 2 months, isn't there, Matthew? Like around, maybe you realize that the topic isn't quite right, the name's not quite right, the approach you were thinking doesn't quite suit you, you don't quite enjoy it this way or that way, and that changes a lot of how you market, doesn't it, Matthew? Like we've seen that happen time and time again, I think.
Yeah, 100%. If you don't have a double figure number of episodes in your feed, the best marketing you could possibly do, the best promotion and growth you could possibly do, is just get your head down and work on your next episode. That's the best thing you could be doing right now. First and foremost, which you're doing. So brilliant.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there aren't still other things we could do to kind of make start to get that early visibility. So he's mentioning guests. So I'm assuming it is an interview show if if there's guests there. So would they be a good starting point? Like your guests, maybe making it compelling or easy for them to start promoting your show in front of their audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic and it still does work in certain cases. It depends a bit on the topic, doesn't it? But if you can, encourage them to share it and give them really good reason to as well. I think that's the bit that a lot of people miss around guest sharing, isn't it? Is that people aren't just going to send out a share. You just ask them to. You need to give them a compelling reason to do it. And one of the best ways is actually to give them something that makes them look really good. So if you can, this is one area where actually short clips can be somewhat effective, because if you can create a short clip that makes them look really smart, makes them look really insightful, gives a great bit of info from them, then that's the kind of thing that people are really willing to share. Equally, some written material too. Like if you can actually share an email with them, which is summing up some of the great insights that they shared on your podcast episode, that's something they might put into their email list or into LinkedIn or somewhere like that. So really, it's about taking the info they shared and creating something that's actually just stupidly useful, that makes them look really good. And that's the kind of thing that they will share. So I don't know, any other tips from you on that, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, it's making it easy and compelling for the guests, like you're saying, isn't it? A lot of podcasters will just say, like, could you share this? They maybe won't even ask. That's the thing. Some podcasters, they won't even ask guests to share it. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I got a little distracted there because I ended up on our scale framework. So I was just going to run through like a couple of
Go
tips
for it.
here. So it's obviously, this is tricky without actually seeing the podcast in question. But if you
Yeah,
look
yeah.
through our scale framework, so it's syndication, communities and collaboration, advertising and paid promotion, live and in person, and email and engagement. So if you're starting in the syndication, I think one of the most important things you could do in those early days is just nail those episode titles, isn't it? Like, mind a couple of months ago we covered our whisper titles framework. Lots of different
Mhm.
ways to title your episodes and your content to make it really searchable and compelling. So, a good early strategy is just to make sure, like, are these episode titles the best that they could possibly be?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, like we said earlier, one of the most underrated ways to grow your show is the SEO side of it. And if you can then pair that with decent show notes as well, so that you then have, those 6 episodes. What do those show notes look like? Are they actually like blog posts, which are kind of master classes on whatever the core topic you're covering on that episode is? Pick out the 3 or 4, or even just 1 or 2 things that is the real standout stuff from that guest, and write a blog post around it. Make sure that those show notes are essentially a blog post with your podcast episode embedded. Make sure that title is really focused on the biggest problem in there as well, so that people find it as a result. And then they'll find it, they'll read it, they'll see your podcast episode embedded in there, and hopefully listen to it at the same time. So yeah, definitely a really good one. The other one I would go on to there, syndication, but communication, community, you mentioned there. Like, I think in the early days, and this is an underrated method as well, is actually the early days of podcasting. One of the most effective ways to get your first 50 or 100 listeners is people you know already, your existing networks, like reaching out to 10 or 20 people you already know. So whether it's colleagues, if your show's about, industry topics, or your show's about a hobby, maybe it's colleagues in your work, or maybe it's people in a club you go to, but equally friends, people you've worked with, all of that kind of stuff. Ask them a really specific thing. Ask them to listen to one episode, and then just leave an honest review on podcast and on Apple Pods or Spotify in the first 48 hours after that. And there's definite signals around that kind of this. The review doesn't necessarily make a huge difference to the algorithm, but that kind of power of getting 10, 20, 30 people all listening within a few days actually does signal to the algorithm that this podcast is kind of waking up. It's starting to get a little bit of momentum, and that can make a difference. But equally, those reviews then give you some social proof that starts off some snowball momentum as well, with people finding it and then actually choosing to listen to it at the same time. What do you think, Matthew?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And sticking with that, like the see and scale communities and collaboration, making a short list of shows or content channels that are potentially going to be collaborators, going to be good fit collaborators for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think last week or the week before I was talking about Raphonic. So go to raphonic.com/graph, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. Punch your show in there, or a show that you consider to be a very similar target audience as yourself, a very similar topic as yourself, and you'll see a whole bunch of podcasts that are potentially going to be a good fit to reach out to, and just try and do some co-promotion, whether that's co-hosted episodes or episode swaps or trailer swaps or whatever. There's loads of opportunities out there, loads of creators in the same boat as yourself that will be open to doing these wee kind of co-growth projects, won't they?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You mentioned a couple of things that he mentioned here as well. He's got email list noted down here in the question. That's always a good idea in the early days. If you want to take this podcast seriously, if you want to really grow an audience around it, it's always a great idea to start an email list in the early days. And it can actually cross over a bit with that blog post, that show notes mention that I had earlier as well, around the fact that when you're writing good, blog posts and show notes all in one place, you've got these pages which function as both, essentially, with the podcast embedded. That content can really easily be repurposed into an email list generally. So you're creating this good written content to go along with every episode, and it turns into all 3 of those. So you've then got an email you can send out every week, start to grow an audience around that. If you use one of the growth type platforms for that too, like Substack or Beehive, then that can actually be another method of attracting people in. It's another way that you can get referrals. People can find you that way as well. So yeah, the email list approach is definitely worthwhile. Just kind of starting to kick off at this point as well.
In the scale framework, the A is for advertising or paid promotion, and obviously we wouldn't recommend a lot of early stage creators to go out there and spend money on ads. But I think one of the, if you were prepared to pay a small amount of money, one of the best uses for that is to find, again, other podcasts in your niche that maybe run like a Patreon or a Beamly account. And some of their rewards, some of their paid rewards are to talk about you or your content on their podcast. Like these tiers do exist. So you might essentially be able to get an ad on a podcast for like, a fiver a month or whatever they're taking on
Yeah.
a membership platform. So again, I know this is a bit more niche, but it's maybe worth looking into if you're prepared to spend a wee bit of money.
Yeah, definitely. It's another, talking of underrated things, Matthew, is actually, generally you can set up a collaboration with people in your niche and get on their show anyway, do some episode swaps. But maybe that's harder in the early days, when you've got lower audience, you've got little audience, and maybe it actually ends up you have to pay a little bit. But actually, a lot of shows, like if you just sort of propose a standard CPM, you can get shows that are 500 to 1,000 listeners and pay just, $25 to $50 to get mentioned on an episode. And some podcasters will happily go work with you on that, just at that kind of level. So you can get a mention on some some podcasts with similar audiences for actually pretty little money.
The Ellen scale is a little tricky because it's live and in person, and obviously this is very topic specific. But one aspect to this that I really like, and I think can work for almost all podcasters, is that kind of guerrilla marketing aspect, the stickers, the cards, the as we've talked about in the past, calling the beer mats. I was going into pubs with my podcast beer mats and leaving them there. So again, this is very, it's not highly scalable, but I think it's still an avenue that you could dip into, and you just never know. Like you never know, you might find you're not going to find hundreds of listeners this way, but you certainly might find a couple of big fans of your show. So
yeah, cool. Well, he mentioned a 2-week launch sprint. So I think there's a few things in there that are definitely worth it. I think spending a day or two in that 2 weeks on the SEO side of things, like making sure the show notes are good, the titles are good, bringing that into the email as well. So starting up that email list if possible as well. And then maybe that guest outreach, like making sure that you create a few things for those first 6 guests to actually share that episode. I think that's a great little 2-week sprint, isn't it? If you worked on all 3 of those, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're just mentioning email there as well, and that is the E in the scale framework too, just to put a wee bow on that. But anything else to add on that, do you think?
No, I think that'd be all. But yeah, maybe the last reassurance is that Borgil here says, he doesn't want to live on social media. And I think just to reiterate, I think we've written and talked about this a fair bit in the past, haven't we, Matthew, that it's definitely possible to grow a podcast without social media still these days. And in fact, often it's easier because social media is so kind of hit and miss and so saturated just now as well. So taking those kind of podcast specific methods, like, the guest outreach, like the collaborations, like maybe even sponsoring a few podcasts or the email that goes alongside it, they're all, I think, so much more effective than most social media methods. So yeah, just to give you reassurance that it is possible, and it's much more fun in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I don't think any of the tactics that we've offered there involved social media, to be quite honest. So yeah, I think you're golden.
Good stuff. All right, let's tie up then, Matthew. I'll just mention Alitu, so our podcast maker app. If you do want an easier way to make your podcast, go over and check out Alitu. It does call recording, it does audio editing, it helps you with your editing, both text-based and waveform-based, automates a whole bunch of it, like audio cleanup and removing your ums and ahs, and then it's got podcast hosting built in as well, so you can do it all in one place. That's over at alitu.com. And a final mention for Beamly as well. Thank you for supporting this episode. That is Beamly, BEAMLY.com. If you want to create some private podcasting content or a community for your podcast, you can monetize your podcast through Beamly really easily. Go over and check out Beamly and tell them that we sent you. All right. Thanks, Matthew. That was good fun. Enjoy these conversational episodes.
Me too. Are we underrated or overrated, me and you?
We are always underrated, Matthew.
That should be a podcast description. The underrated podcast about podcasts.
Thank you out there for listening. You are the underrated listening audience. But I was about to say we overrate you. That's not right. We well rate you.
It's really insulting.
What's the opposite of underrated, which is positive?
We'll rate you highly.
We rate you highly rated. That's it, exactly. Highly rated. The highly rated podcast listener audience, because we appreciate you listening along. Hope we've helped you with your podcast today, and we'll speak to you next time. Cheers.